Today's presentation is on Major Henry Reuben Weston, who served in the Philippines as part of the Medical Corps after the Philippine-American War. Henry Weston grew up on Pine Street in Windsor, Vermont, and attended Windsor High School. As the birthplace of Vermont, Windsor is where the Constitution of Vermont was adopted in 1777, thus marking the founding of the Vermont Republic, a sovereign state until 1791 when Vermont joined the United States. The old Constitution House is the birthplace of Vermont. On July 8, 1777, the first Constitution of the free and independent state of Vermont was adopted here in what was then Elijah West's Tavern. The noteworthy Constitution was the first in America to prohibit slavery and the first to establish universal suffrage for men without the requirements of property ownership or specific income for voting rights. The Vermont Constitution was also the first to establish a system of public schools. Pictured here is Mount Scottney. It is a mountain in the state of Vermont. At 3,144 feet, it is the second highest peak in Windsor County, Vermont, and a popular site for Henry when he grew up, riding horseback in the mountains, running, and also bike riding. Henry attended Dartmouth College after his graduation and taught biology for a year. After graduating, Henry worked at Dartmouth briefly, then attended New York University College of Medicine. It should be noted that there are several milestones in medical care that happened at Dartmouth, including the introduction of stethoscopes to the U.S. medical education in 1838. The first clinical x-ray was completed in 1896, and the first intensive care unit in the U.S. in 1955. Henry went on to attend New York University College of Medicine, which was established in 1841. The medical school merged with Bellevue Hospital Medical College in 1898 to form the university and Bellevue Hospital Medical College. Today, the name is New York Grossman School of Medicine, which was adopted in 2019. Moving to New York at NYU College of Medicine was a major change in Henry's life. This is where he eventually married his wife, Amir Root, in New York City in 1902. Soon after, in 1903, Henry graduated as a Doctor of Medicine from Bellevue Hospital in New York. Much has changed in New York City since 1902. Here is a picture of Bellevue Hospital in New York City. Upon completion of his medical degree, Henry joined the Army and subsequently became an officer in the medical department of the U.S. Army at Camp Lee, Virginia. Pictured here are several recruits entering Camp Lee around the same time that Henry was there. It's difficult to imagine what it would be like for a young American to be so far away from home and experiencing such a completely different culture. The Philippines is located closely with Japan, Vietnam, and China. This map of the Philippines shows where Henry was located in the lowest section in Mindanao, where the Moros lived. With the Spanish rule of the Philippines officially ending by the Treaty of Paris in 1898, it also ended the Spanish-American War. In the treaty, Spain ceded control of the Philippines and other territories to the United States. This, however, sparked the Battle of Manila in February 4th, 1899. In June of 1899, the nascent First Philippine Republic formally declared war on the United States, ordering that peace and friendly relations with the Americans be broken and that the latter be treated as enemies. The ensuing Philippine-American War lasted 3 years and resulted in the death of over 4,200 Americans and over 20,000 Philippine combatants. As many as 200,000 Filipino civilians died from violence, famine, and disease. The Philippines would not become an internationally recognized independent state until 1946. Henry was intrigued by the beauty of the Philippines, but quickly made aware that while the official war was over, it was still very dangerous to travel without troop protection. The First Battle of Badeo, also known as the Moro Crater Massacre, was a counterinsurgency action fought by the United States Army against the Moros in March 1906 during the Moro Rebellion in southwestern Philippines. Whether the occupants of Badeo were hostile to the U.S. forces is disputed, as inhabitants of Yolo Island had previously used the crater, which they considered sacred, as a place of refuge during the Spanish assaults. Major Hugh Scott, the district governor of Sulu province, where the incident occurred, recounted that those who fled to the crater declared they had no intention of fighting, and they ran only there in fright. Some had crops planted and the desire to cultivate them. Out of an estimated 800 to 1,000 Moros at Badeo, only 6 survived. Corpses were piled 5 foot deep, and many of the bodies were wounded multiple times. According to Hurley, American casualties were 21 killed, 75 wounded. Lane, however, lists them as 18 killed and 52 wounded. Hagedorn simply said that 1/4 of the troops actively engaged had been killed or wounded. By any estimate, Badeo was the bloodiest engagement of the Moro Rebellion. Henry arrived at Camp Overton after the Philippine-American War had ended and was assigned as a doctor for the troops. In this photo, we see Captain Henry Weston holding his son's Barrett's hand and his daughter Doris behind him, and his wife Amir in the Philippines. 2 young Filipino assistants are in the background. In a letter to his brother, Henry writes, "It's December 20th, 1908, and we are in the midst of Moro country, in the northwest part of the island of Mindanao, in the most southern of the large islands of the Philippine group. We left Manila on December 11th and had a fine trip to Camp Overton on Iligan Bay on Wednesday. Camp Overton is very delightfully situated at the mouth of the Angus River, near the town of Iligan. The harbor is one of the best in the Philippines. I started out early in Dari, an army couch with a cavalry guard of 4 men, all armed with service rifles and 45 caliber Colts, for we are going through very hostile country, in fact, the most hostile. A few days before, a scout outpost on our route had been shot by the Moros, and a band of hostile Moros were hovering in the vicinity. Like our North American Indians, the Moros won't to ambush these trains and troops for the sake of booty." I am enclosing a picture we took of a large boa constrictor killed at the bottom of the hospital hill. It measured 18 feet long and 20 inches around the middle. It was the largest I've ever seen, and those very largest snakes have been killed in those regions for some time. This particular snake had crawled under the house of a quartermaster employee to get at a pig. In keeping with Captain Henry Weston's position as doctor, he encountered many different groups of people living in the Philippines. Many of the following pictures were actually postcards he shared with his family in Vermont. Some have been embellished to provide information on their actual place of origin in the Philippines. If you looked at the map of the Philippines, Bataan is very far north, and Henry's original postcard is to the right of it. Pictured here is also a postcard in Henry's collection, with over 40 letters that he shared with his brother in Vermont on his experiences in the Philippines. This one shows the inhabitants of the Bataan Peninsula and how they dressed. Banquet in the region of Baikal is is a place in the Philippines some 243 miles southeast of Manila, the country's capital city. The Arrogant people lived in the province of Benguet and were frequently seen with their dogs. Ergot, the general name for the people in north-central Luzon Island in the Philippines. The Ergot form two subgroups. The largest lives in the north-central and western areas and is very adept to rice farming, and the other groups live in east and north. They formerly practiced headhunting. According to some on-site resources, the Ergot people formerly practiced headhunting, and based on Henry's pictures, it was appeared they also used dogs for food. The town of Yolo is located quite near Mindanao, where Henry was stationed in the Medical Corps. Yolo is a volcanic island in the southwest Philippines, and the primary island of the province of Sulu, on which the capital name is situated. It is located in the Sulu arpeggio between Borneo and Mindanao, and has a population of approximately 500,000 people. Here we see a Moro chief and child in Yolo, Philippines. In the aftermath of war, it was hard to imagine such beauty, but the Philippines certainly are peaceful in appearance. There are many tragic consequences of war, and the Philippine people bore them. As Henry discovered, there were also friendly Moros who came into the area to sell fruit. Their style of dress was unique, and being Muslim, they normally did not seek out people of other faiths, like Christians. He wrote, "There are also friendly Moros, as they generally are called. They come into the market reservation every Friday morning, market day, to trade. Some have woven rugs of grass or straw, some have brass bao boxes or trays, some have chickens, and still others have fruit, eggs, or even a young boa constrictor to sell. Whenever a transport is sighted by these Moros back on the hills, they flock down to the post at the seashore and proceed to bleed these tourists as newly arrived officers, attuned to which is equal to the best and that can be done at one of our swell summer resorts." After serving for several years in the Philippines, Dr. Weston prepared to return home with his family. Prior to leaving, they were blessed with an opportunity to briefly visit China and Japan. Initially, they stopped in Hawaii, and he was assigned to Camp A. Humphreys in Vermont, while his family returned home to Windsor, Vermont. 8 years later, Captain Henry Weston became an assistant camp surgeon at Camp Humphreys during World War I. When Henry returned to the States, he was assigned to Camp A. Humphreys, Virginia, which later became known as Fort Belvoir in Virginia. Henry was recognized as a major in the Medical Corps on October 9th, 1918. Tragically, 49 days later, he died at the age of 40 as a result of the 1918 influenza. Here we see recognition as a major in the Medical Corps took place on October 6, 1918. Henry's obituary followed his death on November 28, 1918, at the age of 40. Major Henry Reuben Weston was buried in Mount Ascutney Cemetery in Windsor, Vermont in 1956. Damn it, 1918. Major Henry Reuben Weston was buried in Mount Ascutney Cemetery in Windsor, Vermont in 1918. After a challenging but rewarding career As a medical corps doctor, Henry Reuben Weston was buried in Windsor, Vermont. May he rest in peace. This is the conclusion of our program for today. It was an honor for me to be able to share Henry's story of service.